It's been about 5 weeks since my last stream. Fortunately, there has been no news to cover, none that I'm aware of anyway. That is until last Friday, when the GDP numbers came out for the June 2025 quarter. And unfortunately, New Zealand's gross domestic product fell by 0.9%. A drop was expected, but it wasn't expected to be quite so severe. And as what this did, of course, was set politicians and pundits aflame, with Labour leader Chris Hipkins calling for a government-wide resignation in light of yesterday's GDP data release. This I'm reading off News Talk ZB. However, he hasn't echoed demands for Economic Growth Minister Nicola Willis to step down, made by former Labour Finance Minister and ACT founder Rodger Douglas. We'll hear more from him, I'm sure. Expectations were for a 0.4% decline in GDP. Reserve Bank said there'd be a 0.3% drop, but we got a 0.9, which is quite a lot worse. Luxon and Willis maintained the United States tariff regime disrupted global trade and shook investors' confidence, leading to an economic downturn felt more keenly by trade-dependent nations such as New Zealand. Rodger Douglas, alongside University of Auckland Chair of Macroeconomics Roger McCulloch, yesterday called for Willis to resign as they expressed concerns about the level of spending on pensions and health. Ultimately, this is the economic strategy that the government signed up to. Look at the coalition agreements. Winston Peters, David Seymour, Christopher Luxon all signed up to this approach to managing the economy. It's failing. This presumably from McCulloch. I mean, I don't really know what they're getting at, because you wouldn't expect an excess of government spending to cause a downturn in GDP. But nevertheless, Nicola Willis. Okay, international turmoil and uncertainty. This is from RNZ. Driven by the United States tariff rollout. That's what she blames it on. But Labour, I mean, we can hear her say it. But Labour says other countries like Australia have fared the storm better, accusing the coalition of taking New Zealand backwards. So, I mean, I'm just going to take their word for it, RNZ's word for it, that that's what someone from Labour said. Let's take a look at how things have gone in Australia. Well, I mean, it doesn't really do so well. If you can't use Australia as an example, Nicola Willis hasn't used Australia as an example, but Labour is pointing to Australia as an economy that is outperforming New Zealand. So they grew by 0.6%, so 0.5% more than New Zealand, because we were down by 0.9. For the March quarter, though, let's take a look at this. For the March quarter, we got 0.9% growth, so we were up, but they only got 0.3. So, that's a win for us. And not quite as, there's a 0.3% gap in our favour. The December quarter, we were down 0.6. They were up 0.6. It's just not looking very good. Let's see. September 24, we were down 1.1. What were they on? They were up 0.3. So, it may be that New Zealand is more exposed to these tariffs, but I don't know. That's a lot. That's a big difference between us and Australia is still heavily trade dependent. I haven't looked up any of the trade numbers. You could look at that and settle this. Either way, it's probably going to show that New Zealand is feeling it more on trade, but that is not the reason. Spoiler, we'll go into why, or why we can confidently say that. And yeah, there are an increasing number of insolvencies and business failures that are happening around the country as a result of this. So, for example, retail icon Smith City, used to be Dick Smith Electronics, has just gone into voluntary administration. amid increasing financial pressures. So they were always going to go under. I mean, they've always been, everyone's been waiting for them to collapse. They've shrunk and shrunk and shrunk and shrunk and shrunk. And, you know, they just haven't been able to stand up to the pressure of Noel Leeming, JB Hi-Fi and Harvey Norman. But it is notable that it happened now. They were founded in Christchurch in 1918. But they only operate 9 stores across the country. I actually recently bought something from Smith City. I think it might be actually one of the recording components I'm using for this. So getting quick before it's all gone, because, you know, they were a Kiwi icon. Speaking of, Hop Federation from Motueka Brewery shutting down. They just couldn't do it. Denheath Desserts, not the custard squares. And Cranky Goat, the cheesemaker, also going into liquidation. On the upside, there has been, economists have forecast a reduction in the price of goat curry. But taking this out of short-term reduction, I should say, taking this out of the anecdotal sphere and looking at actual numbers, this from, what is this, McDonald Vey, Insolvency by the Numbers. Who are these people? Can we really trust them? I just will. So, McDonald Vey, they are a law firm, and they are saying that they track insolvencies, and they've found that winding up applications are at a high or were at a high in May of 2025. And you can see on this chart how they've increased from a low in 2022 to ever higher heights, 23, 24, and now 25. It does look like things aren't going great. But let's look at what some people have been saying about it, or saying about what we should do about it. This from Ruth Richardson. Now, Ruth Richardson was the National Labour of Finance in 1991. Rodger Douglas was the Labour Minister of Finance in 1984. These two people are the two most important people in New Zealand's recent economic history, certainly in our contemporary economic history. They designed the economy that we live in. We'll go into a little bit why. This from Ruth Richardson, quoted by the New Zealand Taxpayers Union, of which she is chair. 2 years into the government's economic agenda, it is clear the current plan is failing and it is time for a bold change in direction, says the Honourable Ruth Richardson, the chair of the Taxpayers Union. Get big government's foot off the throat of the economy. Former Finance Minister Rodger Douglas is calling for Finance Minister Nicola Willis to resign. He and University Chair of Macroeconomics, Robert McCulloch, this is going over what they said a bit more specifically, said the contraction in GDP revealed by Stats NZ on Thursday was because Willis was sending New Zealand bankrupt by failing to get to grips with our ballooning fiscal deficits and public debt. Her own Treasury contradicts her claim that NZ is on a path to surplus. It is not. I mean, this is absolutely true. Treasury's long-term fiscal forecasts show out-of-control deficits due to pensions, healthcare spending from an ageing population. I don't understand what they think we're supposed to do about this, right? Like, it's like they say, you got to stop spending on health. You know, is that really the plan? The books are not improving, and this surplus she talked about today, that's a creative accounting trick. That's true. They have actually lied appallingly, and I think it's very bad. We'll actually look. She changed the way the accounts were being measured. She keeps saying they're getting better. It's not true. They are not getting better. He's right. The economy has been growing strongly in the previous 6 months. No, this is Willis, but suddenly had the stuffing knocked out of it. I mean, bullshit. She mentioned the tariffs hitting much harder here. That makes no sense at all. In fact, most countries overseas have had far higher tariff uncertainty than New Zealand. This coming from McCulloch. Okay, so this is what everyone's had to say. These are all the pundits. This is all the opinions floating around. I would feel for Nicola Willis, except she has just brazenly lied to the public about like really embarrassing, shallow lies about government debt and the way that they measure surplus. So let's see, New Zealand GDP. All right. So here's our GDP, and it bumps up and down. It bumps up and down for the most part. It just goes. It keeps on a pretty positive straight line up, and you struggle to find a difference between different political parties. The Rodger Douglas, see, we were flat for a while. Rodger Douglas took the reins in '84. And you can see in this, at the time, the country was in absolute crisis. It was completely falling apart. We nearly defaulted on our international debt obligations. And I think we actually didn't pay. We missed a payment on some debt we owed Japan. Things were really, really bad. This is the Schnapps election, right, that Robert Muldoon called. So in comes David Lange with Rodger Douglas as his finance minister, and they liberalise the economy. They shrink the government. They fire tons and tons and tons of workers. This is an important point for when we look at Ruth Richardson's track record. They fire tons of workers and bring the government books into surplus. I'm not gonna, I won't second guess something done in the panic of the moment. It seemed something had to be done, and they did something, and it seemed to work. And so between 84 and 88, you see growth. But then there was the crash of 87, which might have been a fuel crash or something, whatever it was. Big stock market crash, 87, 88, and you see things start to look, the wheels seem to come off a bit. By the stage, in 88, I think Rodger Douglas had left the government because people thought he was too much of a psycho about shrinking down the government and totally going all in on market economics. Ruth Richardson comes in 1990, and for 1991, they have the mother of all budgets, as they called it. And in 1991, what they did was they had tons and tons of unemployment, tons of people on unemployment, and they were paying tons out in welfare because all of these people who had previously had government jobs under under the Muldoon regime, as it's referred to, they were fired in 84 and found themselves in just the market for work. Many of them found work, but then when the crash in 87, 88 happened, many people went out of work again. We'll look at unemployment rates for this period in a second. And so you had a huge number of beneficiaries. And what she did was slash benefits, as they like to say. So all of these people were on benefits, and suddenly they became extraordinarily poor. And this is often described as being what kick-started a cycle of poverty that has trapped a large portion of the country today. Or to this day, I should say, entrenched multi-generational poverty. This is the legacy that people associate with Ruth Richardson. Her budget was referred to as the Ruthanasia. You see, this period continues along, and it's not, sure enough, things do rebound a bit after this budget. Not after 92, but they do start getting better. And then you notice this massive blast after 2001 in the growth, the increase in scale of New Zealand's GDP. And you've got to ask what this is. Why has this changed? What has changed to create so much growth? Well, for one, you've got the dot-com bubble burst that holds things down at the end of the 90s. It kind of was starting to, I think, people saw things were going a bit weird in prior to its pop. You can see there's a decline from 97, 98, 99, 2001. Things just aren't going well. I mean, honestly, it's hard to give Ruth Richardson too much credit here because they were in charge. She was in charge when this was happening. So she'll claim that she's good at this. I mean, but she just saw two She did preside over two economic crashes. Anyway, so what happened? Do I have this properly linked somewhere? I should have this. I'll just search it up. Reserve Bank of New Zealand Amendment Act 1999. So in this act, we won't go through it. They changed the way that the Reserve Bank tried to stabilize the economy. And what they did was, so this is a graph of New Zealand unemployment, the official cash rate, and also the yield on 10-year bonds since 86, is it? Something like that. So this green line here that you can see, this is the official cash rate. And you notice it starts in 1999. So what was happening was, prior to this, when the Reserve Bank wanted to influence exchange rates or unemployment or inflation or whatever they were doing back in those days, they would buy bonds out of the market. They'd buy government bonds. And so what happens is banks loan money to the government. This isn't how it actually works, but this is how people talk about it, and it's good enough for our purposes here. Banks loan money to the government, and then they own a bond. And then they go and they might sell that bond on the market because it pays a yield, a reliable yield, and the government is a reliable creditor. Let's see, in 86, government bonds were paying, what's that, over 12%, probably close to 14%, 10, 12, close to 13%. This is on 10-year bonds. And this means that people really don't trust the government back in those days. Things were a mess under Robert Muldoon. Obviously, they'd managed to kind of right the ship a little bit, Rodger Douglas had, and the rest of the gang. But there was supremely low confidence, and there was also extremely high inflation. And they were trying to control that inflation by increasing interest rates. And as you see this red line decline, which is yield on 10-year bonds, you can see this blue line increase. And what's really happening is there's this crash, the 87, 88 crash, massive increase in unemployment from 4 to over 10%. And so the Reserve Bank uses a whole bunch of market mechanisms that it's got to decrease the cost of borrowing, to reduce the price of bonds and increase people's ability to buy and borrow money and buy stuff and employ workers. And that's what they're trying to do, stimulate the economy. You hear people talk about this all the time. Back in these days, this was the big moment when interest rates dropped and real estate prices started firing up because people could borrow money really, really cheaply. And as this goes down, it lags unemployment a bit because they're reacting to unemployment and they're trying to bring unemployment down. And then you see it sort of works. It sort of works. They see unemployment declining, but inflation is going up. It's not on this chart. And so they increase the price of bonds, using every method that they can. They buy the bonds out of the market, etc. But this is really messy, and these are some big swings. People in the government know this, and the bankers know this, and they say we need another method. We need a better system for managing the economy and managing the supply of money. And what they do is they come up with this idea of the official cash rate, which you can think of as the rate of interest that banks can borrow from the Reserve Bank. Banks all have a bank account with the Reserve Bank, and they store cash there overnight, and sometimes they need a little bit of extra cash to borrow, and they have to pay, these are huge sums, and they have to pay enormous amounts of interest to the Reserve Bank, and they receive it from the Reserve Bank when they keep money there. And the way that the Reserve Bank decided it would influence the economy is not by intervening directly in markets anymore, although they still kind of do that. You would have heard of quantitative easing from 2008, which is what they did in the US. This is kind of what we were doing before. Now what they do is, in New Zealand anyway, is they just change the interest rate that they pay out at the Reserve Bank. And you've got to be a bank to have an account at the Reserve Bank or the government. And so when they do this, you see that suddenly the 10-year the yield on 10-year bonds starts kind of tracking the same as unemployment. And this is because the Reserve Bank has stopped trying to manipulate it. Instead, the volatility, the inverse volatility, has gone into the official cash rate, which you see doing the exact opposite of unemployment. And it seems to work pretty well. And let's go back to GDP. Back here, 98, 99, this is when it happens. This is when they make that change. And it's worth noting that this is in the middle of the dot-com boom. Like this is in the middle of the dot-com boom, but the bust happens. And that bust explains some of the suppression in economic performance for these years. But then immediately afterward, it shoots up. So Ruth Richardson is really claiming what we need is economic austerity, which is what she did. And this is the period that it covered, 91 to 1999, that's when they were in government, but they haven't done very well. The economy just didn't really do very well. Certainly, Rodger Douglas has an excuse. I mean, he's got a hopeless track record, but he's got an excuse because the country was bankrupt. Right after these guys are involved, everything goes gangbusters. It's far fairer to align this with the change in the way the Reserve Bank works than any of these guys' political actions. Also, or any politician's actions, for that matter. You can also take a look at the way that governments spend money. If you want to look at if you want to test these people's claims, whether Labour is right or Ruth Richardson is right or Rodger Douglas is right, or National is right about how they're managing the economy, let's have a look at how they actually have performed in the past. Well, it's pretty hard to see a difference in the actual government spending. This is government spending. This chart is a ratio of government spending to GDP in New Zealand from 85 to 2030, because this is from the World Bank or whatever, the IMF, and they do forecasting. Look, you can't tell me that there's a difference between the parties. They do the same amount of government spending. It's kind of this. I don't know what they're talking about. It's like, you're doing it totally wrong. It's like, I'm doing it the same as you would do it, man. And then, I mean, look at this is child poverty rate. You hear a lot of complaints about National's track record on child poverty and not addressing the issue, etc. But it's very hard to say that any of these political parties have had any impact whatsoever on child poverty. I mean, it's massive in the Douglas period. He's got the excuse of the massive crisis that was left at the end of the Muldoon government. So he can kind of claim that. And then things get better over the two through the 90s. At the same time, as we saw, GDP is getting better, and then it gets better, and we see GDP getting better. But then come 2005, we see a steady increase. Well, come 2005, I mean, we see a steady increase in GDP. So GDP itself doesn't appear to be actually attached to child poverty rates either. So these numbers, all this talk about the economy and how important it is and how one party's good for it and another party's bad for it, or one party's good for social reasons and another party's bad for those reasons, none of them actually stack up. You can't see this in the historic performance of any of the parties. So, I mean, you kind of got to call bullshit on everything that all of these people are saying. Now, let's see if I've got anything left to add. I might do. Let's take a look at National's fiscal plan and Labour's fiscal plan. National is spending more money, vastly more money than even Labour did in the last government. Now, when they campaigned, this is their National Party fiscal plan from before the election that they campaigned on. They said this election was all about the economy. Only through a strong economy can we end the cost of living crisis, lift wages, reduce interest rates, and afford the public services we all rely on, like hospitals, schools, and police. Well, as we've seen, there's no correlation with government spending and GDP performance. A key plank of National's plan to rebuild the economy is discipline government spending, get the government books back in order, seeing debt blow out from $5 billion in 2019 to $104 billion in the latest forecast. This is what they're saying Labor has done. Well, actually, this is total bullshit. It's a fucking lie. What are you on about, man? It did not, I mean, where did you get that $5 billion number? Just a barefaced lie about a $5 billion debt in 2019 to 104. National will spend less than Labor, they say. Well, they haven't done that. National's 5 fiscal principles. This isn't all interesting. They're going to return surplus and reduce debt. They have not done that. They're going to support frontline services. Well, nurses, doctors, teachers are all on strike, and the government's seeking binding arbitration with nurses because they can't get them. They can't get them to make a deal. And we actually covered them in that last session. Some of the strikes. Maybe we can do more on that. Let's see. The living tax relief. Blah blah blah. I don't think this is their fault. Okay, I'm not saying that National are bad. I am saying they're incompetent. I think they thought they could do this. I just think they are dummies. But let's take a look at what Labor says. So they said the next few budgets will be tight. Now is the time for a radical change in direction. We're going to keep net debt below 30% of GDP. Okay, actually, now that let's see, do I have a link to net debt? Let's see where it is, if I do. Government debt stats. Look at that. Okay, so where is our net debt? What does this actually look like? Well, debt to GDP is basically how much we're spending versus how much debt we have versus how performant the economy is. This is how the argument goes. And we can see, this number that that National is using, $5 billion in 2019. Well, it's hard to find this in the Stats NZ numbers. They say the net operating balance was $9.9 billion. The net debt was $28 billion. That's $28 billion after the removal of $28 billion after they've taken the superannuation fund out of it. And the percent of GDP is 9.3%. So things are looking good. But I just want to really point out, net debt, this is the lowest number that you can do for New Zealand debt. And be honest, for 2019, this is Stats NZ. National says $5 billion. Stats NZ says 28. Now this obviously balloons, 28 to 48, and then stabilizes a bit in its growth. But then boom, 2022, 71 billion. 2023, 84. This is net debt, okay? And then this is what they've used for this 104 billion number is a forecast of the future. But let's actually look at what this looks like as a percentage of GDP. 21.5% is what Labor leaves on the table. And currently, we're sitting at 21.5%. So Labor said they'd keep it under 30. That is under 30%. What are they even committing to there? If they're keeping that under 30. Because it sounds like ultimately what Labor is doing is saying that we would do exactly the same thing that National is doing, and that is borrow shit tons of money because you've got to. 413, how do you calculate percentages? I know it goes the other way, doesn't it? You go 88. Oh, no. 413 times 0.3, 31%. So Labor said that they would keep net debt under $123.9 billion if we were to use today's numbers, if we were to use today's standards. So they were talking about spending shit tons. And National has definitely performed within their kind of austerity envelope. But they're still spending tons of money. The economy is still tanking. Everyone's saying that they've got some opinion about it. if you actually look at what everyone says, it's a bunch of bullshit. Either they say the same thing or they're not credible. And yeah, there's no major difference between any of the political parties on this subject. So I guess GDP is going down and no one really knows why. And that's the news. Thank you very much.